All right. I think we are ready to go. All right. So, like I said, I'll take questions at the end, but I kind of want to spend the time just kind of getting everybody up to speed about like what New Voices is, how it can protect student advisors, students and advisors, not just in Pennsylvania, but nationwide. My presentation is a little bit Pennsylvania centric, but because I assume most people on the call are from the state, but there are lots of different things that we can kind of talk about that benefit you regardless. So let's get started. The first thing, the first question that I kind of wanted to start with was, what story would you tell if you weren't afraid to do so? Or, you know, as if you're as an advisor, which stories would you like to see your students pursue that in present conditions make you professionally nervous? Is a question that I think every advisor maybe asks themselves from time to time. So we kind of, as a board from the Pennsylvania School Press Association, put out a survey in the spring of 2019, and we let it run through the fall. And we asked member schools basically that question, and several others, about the way that their publications work at their schools, how they felt about the way the process works, just to kind of gauge where everybody was. And 203 students responded, 34 advisors responded, 97% of the respondees were from public schools. So I wanted to show you just some interesting points from that. We asked advisors, have you ever pulled or removed a section of a story in its entirety or the entire publication itself? And the ones that answered yes, we asked them, you know, for what purpose? And see, these are some of the responses we got. Administration asked us to. Controversial topics in our conservative area. Story didn't seem to have bias, but I was also not sure if the administration would be okay with the content. So you can see right there, just and I kind of synthesized a little bit. Administration is a key component to this equation. Administration asked us to, or I'm not really sure if administration would be okay with it. Controversial topics, except obviously something that's controversial doesn't necessarily mean that it's not newsworthy. But I know from speaking as an advisor, there are things like that just sometimes stand in our way of promoting good journalism. And it's our fear of ruffling feathers. It's very understandable that many of us that go to work each day want to go in there and have an issue-free day where we don't have a tough email to deal with, or a phone call, or a meeting in the office, or things like that. And getting through a day like that is ideal, for sure. But sometimes our desire to kind of get through the day like that, or our just assumption that things could create an issue, can sometimes lead us to point our student journalists in a different direction. We asked students which topics are off limits, and a lot of repeats. Extremely political topics and those that may hurt or put into question the reputation of the school. LGBTQ plus related topics, gun violence, and something that we're all kind of seeing more and more these days are drills regarding threats at school, like active shooter drills and trainings and such like that. The tough part is, you know, these are things that not only are we seeing in our news, but we're seeing on social media, we're seeing all over the place. And when students, whether it's accurate or not, if students perceive these topics to be off limits, they are still going to have these conversations in person or on social media, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But the fact that they don't feel comfortable having these conversations in their publications and, you know, telling the stories of their classmates is a little bit troubling. We asked we asked the students and advisors if a school administrator reviews the publication before it's released, and 68% of the students said that administrator does, 41% said that they do. And that can be a perception thing as well, but that's still a pretty high percentage on both sides of the equation for prior review. So the term prior review meaning the administrator reviews your content prior to publication. The big one: would added legal protection for student journalists and advisors in Pennsylvania result in stronger journalism at your school? I think that's a pretty staggering response. Absolutely, in both cases. Students felt a little more strongly about it, but that's what New Voices is all about, and that's what we're going to get into. Final question for that we'll talk about, at least for now. Have you or your staff ever reached out to the Student Press Law Center for advice or support? A little bit more than 2/3 said no. And when we talk to Hillary here in a bit, we're going to find out just why you should take advantage of those resources. Okay, so what is this New Voices thing that I'm talking about? New Voices is a student-powered, nonpartisan grassroots movement of state-based activists who seek to protect student press freedom with state laws. And that's something we're working on here in Pennsylvania, which I will get into. It counteracts the impact of the 1988 Hazelwood versus Kuhlmeyer Supreme Court decision, which undermined a lot of the protections that the Tinker versus Des Moines Supreme Court decision in the 60s had for student media. Supporters of New Voices include advocates in law, education, journalism, and civics. So this is not isolated. This is not education specific, but there's a lot of advocates for a lot of different and a lot of great reasons. Okay, so let's talk about what this does, what the actual legislation does do. The legislation does allow school officials to stop publication of student media in certain cases, including concerns of libel or slander, violations of state or federal law or school board policy, privacy violations, or material disruption of the school day. It also allows school boards to adopt policies relating to student media. So school boards also have the ability to determine the appropriate time, place, and manner of school-sponsored media. So basically, I mean, this is a concern that we've heard throughout the process. Is, you know, if we enact New Voices and administrations are no longer reviewing content prior to publication, and censoring student media has a much higher hurdle to clear. What kind of authority do school officials still have? Clearly, they still have some. I mean, like this does not give a student journalist or a student journalism publication carte blanche to publish just anything. It still has to follow standards, and it's still subject to policies that school boards and officials adopt. It does protect teachers who refuse to unlawfully interfere with student speech. So no teacher under New Voices would be fired, disciplined, or reassigned for following the law. And like I said a couple minutes ago, it brings the conversations that students are having on social media back into the light. So like, student journalists want to talk about the things that are important to students, and to do so transparently. They have a responsibility to seek responses from administrators and spark a dialogue which cannot happen in the shadow of social media. So like I said, these conversations will happen. They're going to happen. And a lot of times you'd find that your students will take ownership of these topics and kind of cover them in a more professional manner when they are publishing content for their media entity, rather than just using their social media platform to share and produce content that way. It also puts the rights of journalists back in line with those of every other student on campus. So I already mentioned the Hazelwood decision, which kind of undermines some of these things, but the Tinker decision from the 60s, when Mary Beth Tinker and her brother and their friend wore black armbands to protest the Vietnam War, and were suspended from school for that, and they fought and won. And the ultimate line from that decision was that students do not shed their rights to free speech at the schoolhouse gate. And that held strong until the Hazelwood decision. But Since then, student media organizations or students that create student media are held to a much higher standard than your average student. And so New Voices will kind of level that playing field back where it needed to be. The legislation, however, does not, and like I said, allow student journalists to publish with impunity and without feedback. Advisors and administrators may still discuss with students what's appropriate to publish. And that's something that I know that, teachers, you're doing in your classrooms already. Student journalists weigh this feedback and the tenets of journalistic ethics in pursuing their work. New Voices does not give student journalists the same rights as experienced professionals because schools are unique settings with a responsibility to protect student safety. So the legislation does ensure that advisors and administrators can act as appropriate in certain situations. The legislation, and this is a concern that you'll hear from maybe school boards or administrators, does not open schools up to lawsuits. Libel and other content-based lawsuits against school newspapers are extremely rare. And to date, the SPLC was aware of no reported court decision where a school district has been held liable for material published by its high school student media. New Voices does not impact students who are not actively creating student media or interfere with school social media policies. The bill covers only student journalists and the creation of school-sponsored media and does not give students rights beyond the Tinker standard. And the legislation does not stop teachers and administrators from teaching or discussing proper English usage or journalistic ethics. The bill does expressly protect that ability. All right, so here's where we are to date. The map from where it once was is a lot more colorful these days, which is a great thing. Bills for New Voices have been introduced in 12 states. There are 21 active campaigns. Some highlights from the past year: Colorado unanimously updated their existing law to protect advisors. That's a great thing. Hawaii, the bill passed in the House and passed the first Senate committee, so it's on its way in the Senate. We're hoping for some more positive updates from Hawaii. Nebraska, they filibustered the bill, but they do have enough votes for passage. New Jersey's bill unanimously passed the Senate, and Virginia, the legislation passed protecting college students. So things are moving. When this effort started, the law existed in about 14 states, and since those states enacted their laws, a lot of other states have followed suit. Certainly with the tireless efforts of the SPLC and Hillary, who you'll meet here shortly. All right, so what's the point, right? So censorship, as you can kind of tell a little bit by the survey results that I went over, censorship and self-censorship, they're real issues. And a lot of times it's not even something that maybe would happen in reality. Like, in other words, maybe an advisor is a little bit cautious about publishing this story because they think that somebody might be upset about it. Somebody in administration might be upset about it, or a parent or a school board member or whatever. Students have those same concerns, but because some of those concerns are perceived, you assume that there could be an issue. Self-censorship happens, and what we've kind of learned throughout the process of working with New Voices so far is that self-censorship is often a bigger issue than actual censorship. So it's still censorship whenever you feel like you are kind of holding back what you should be publishing just because you feel like something could come of it. This also impacts advisor interest and or effectiveness. I told this story to Helen and Heidi the other day, where when I was in my final stages before student teaching, our cohort of future English teachers were taking a class, and one of our advisors told us, hey, whenever you apply for your job as an English teacher, you want to make sure in your application letter that you put down that you'd be willing to take on the high school newspaper, the high school yearbook. He said, okay, like, what if you don't have experience? It's like, it doesn't matter. Like, you want to put down that you're interested in those things because nobody wants those jobs, and that will make you more marketable looking than somebody who doesn't put that down. And it's like, oh geez, maybe I don't want that job. I don't know what to expect. I did put that down on my application letter. However, those positions were already in place when I first started at Freedom. It wasn't a couple years later where I had my predecessor had left and then had recommended that I take over with almost no experience, or basically no experience, and I was terrified. Having done this for so many years now, joined by many of you fellow crazy people on the call, that I have a very different reality, I think, than what that I was warned about, because this is, I think, a very rewarding, I don't want to say calling almost, it's like this takes a certain kind of person to be able to do, to advise a student publication. It takes a lot of work and time, as you know. But whenever you have things like censorship and self-censorship kind of getting in the way, censorship makes folks that might be willing to advise less likely to want to get into that, because, like I said, it's not hard to understand that most people just want to go to work and have an event-free, issue-free day and go home and and go back and do it again the next day. And if it seems like the publications advisor is butting heads with administration, that doesn't look like an appealing route to take. And even if an advisor is willing to get on board and maybe fight some of those battles, when you self-censor, or whenever you feel as an advisor that you have to maybe point your student journalists in a different direction that you feel is promoting great journalism, your effectiveness, I think, would come into question, and not by most other people, but like, intrinsically, I think you would worry maybe a little bit that, like, I'm not doing my best job if I am preventing my student journalists from publishing great journalism. Many suburban and rural areas have become news deserts in this day and age. It's no secret that print is becoming second rate to digital, and a lot of print newspapers, unfortunately, are scaling back staffs, and some are shutting up, and because of that, there are sometimes situations where student publications are the only source reporting news in those areas, which is kind of a scary thought. So I kind of wanted to ask, like, which media source reports on your school board? I know growing up, I grew up in an area where there was a tri-county newspaper, and every time there was a school board meeting, it was on the front page of the newspaper. That was something I was kind of used to. And then when I started advising at my school, I learned that the Beaver County Times was the closest newspaper, the most local newspaper that we had, and their staff was much larger even when I started advising than it is now. They've scaled back, and very seldom will cover issues related to our school, or at least issues that aren't making bigger news sources. And so I have students that attend the school board meetings, and they cover our school board. And that's actually something that, if that's something that your students do, or that's something that you think your students should do, or you'd like to learn more about that, speaking of, there'll be a future session on July 14th with Stacy Hetrick from Sagertown High School and myself. We'll talk about, on that session, covering government meetings and why that's so important in today's media environment. Okay, so when budget and or PR is of concern, student media can be at risk. So, like, how's that relate to new voices? So it's no secret that schools are concerned about their reputation. Schools' PR, their reputation affects enrollment. It affects funding. It affects, like test scores are of concern, and all of these things affect graduation rates. When your school has a reputation for enrollment on the rise or like higher test scores or whatever, like it kind of, it's kind of a snowball effect in some cases. School board elections are of a high interest, and that affects your superintendents on down. So basically, a school has to kind of control and tries to control and is concerned about its image because it affects so many different pieces of the puzzle. But one thing that is you got to remember too is like your publication is not public relations. Like your job as an advisor or your job as a student is to make sure that news is being published and not PR. And those are two different entities. But anything that can affect the PR, the positive PR of your school district, is something that will be on your administrator's radar. And those are the same administrators that make budgetary decisions. And that's why some of these things can be at risk. And with COVID-19, I know a lot of you that are currently dealing with the budget process for next year's items have probably learned or read that it will or has already impacted budgets, and we don't want that to affect student media. So in conversations with the Student Press Law Center and several of the New Voices advocates across the country, Hillary Davis, I'm introducing now, has put together a high school budget advocacy toolkit. Again, Hillary is the New Voices advocacy and campaign organizer for the Student Press Law Center. And I'd like to introduce her so she can talk to you a little bit about what that might mean for you and your program should you face any sort of budgetary concerns because of COVID-19 or any other issue.
Thanks, Aaron, and thanks everybody for having me here today. I'm always really excited to talk to people about this kind of stuff. For those of you who don't know, the Student Press Law Center is effectively a legal resource that exists solely for high school and college student journalists and their advisors. We work nationwide. We're located here in Washington, D.C., and we do a number of things. The one that's very often most necessary for everybody is that we have a legal hotline where you or your students can speak one-on-one with one of our attorneys to talk through things like doing a libel check on a story to make sure nobody's crossing a line, to talk through if you suspect that you're being censored, what the laws are, what sort of strategies you can employ, all sorts of things around, copyright, use of photographs, really any of the legal questions that student journalists and advisors might have. My responsibility at the Student Press Law Center is completely around the New Voices campaign. My job effectively is to connect all of the different chapters together, make sure that everybody is aware of the trends, the things that are going on, but most importantly, telling you when things are weird and when things are just how legislatures work. I have a long background in working with state legislatures, so I am very familiar with and able to tell people if their legislature is being a little crazy, if your bill's in danger, or if you're doing things just right. Spoiler, most of the time they're doing things just right. If I can go off book for a second, I do want to sing the praises of our New Voices advocates, especially over the last couple of years. The Student Press Law Center was not always the home for New Voices. It grew out of the states. And when we realized that it was becoming a true movement in the past few years, I was brought on board to kind of coordinate things. But it is a state movement that grew from students and advisors who wanted to make things better for student journalism. And in the last couple of years, we really have seen incredible momentum. In fact, up until COVID-19 happened, every single time a New Voices bill came up this year, it moved forward, which never happens, never, and was really exciting and thrilling to see. Every time in every state, the bills were taking steps forward, whether that was getting new sponsors on board, passing committees and subcommittees, in some states, entire sides of the legislature. And we were really seeing an incredible push forward, and I think that will continue. And it's going to continue in large part because of the work of the student journalists over the past 4 months in particular. The story that we always hear is that student journalists are maybe too immature to tell really big, critical, important stories, except that in the last 4 months, they've been the only thing holding their schools together. The only reason why there is school community now is because student journalists have been making sure that they are telling the stories of every single student, keeping their students informed, keeping them aware of the things that are going on. Yearbook is the only reason why kids are looking back and remembering that this is a year that they can be really happy and proud of and should be proud of. And in a lot of cases, yearbook and journalism is why there are graduations that have happened over the last month. And then a bunch of kids started going out and covering protests, and in some cases putting themselves at risks. So we owe it to the students to give them student press freedom next year. We've owed it to them for 30 years, but there's no denying that the work of the last 4 months shows that student journalists are journalists, they're strong journalists, and this needs to happen. So we are all coming back very strong here in the near future. There are a couple of states that still have a very strong chance of getting New Voices legislation passed this year because of the nature of their legislative session being year-round. One is New Jersey and the other is Pennsylvania. So there is still a very strong shot for Pennsylvania to see legislation move forward this year, and I'm really thrilled about that. But I do want to talk specifically about the Budget Advocacy Toolkit. We all know that student journalism and their budget is very often the very first thing on the chopping block, along with arts education and a number of other things. And so we know that with COVID-19 budget cuts coming, student journalism is going to be facing a tremendous push against what you guys have to work with. And we also know that COVID-19 presents a really cheap opportunity for administrators who haven't been real thrilled with the coverage that they've had over the past few years, or who have felt that student journalism is more of a burden than anything else. This provides a nice, tidy opportunity for them to come in and do what they've been wanting to do for years. I do want to make a point that if you or anybody you know thinks that your budget is being cut or slashed or impacted at all because of the content of what your students have put forth, that is censorship, is probably already illegal, and you should contact the SPLC. But we also know that for a lot of people, it maybe won't be quite that clear cut. So we have put together a high school budget advocacy toolkit, which is specifically designed to help you push back against the decisions of your administrators in a way that is productive and clear and hopefully not incredibly burdensome on you. Our thinking is that administrators generally don't want to make the decisions that are going to be controversial. If you push back even a little, you may have a good shot at securing your funding for this year and the future years. And so we have set up the toolkit to address a few very specific things that we suspect you will see, which is classes full on being eliminated, so the advisor is reassigned, or the class is just taken away entirely, a reclassification to a club, the elimination or significant reduction of a budget. I do want to say that this is a living document. We expect that we will be updating it as time goes on and new things are happening. Your enrollment in your class next year is reduced, that kind of stuff. If you are hearing or thinking you will hear of other situations that we have not covered, please let me know. We will put stuff up on our website as soon as possible, but you guys all have your finger on the pulse much more than I do. The toolkit is set up to talk to advisors, students, and parents. I know a lot of advisors are very uncomfortable pushing back on this kind of stuff, and that's completely understandable. To a large extent, I suspect it will be the parents who will have the most sway, and so you should very much feel free to share this with parents. The toolkit includes a number of things like who else you should be reaching out to, a phone script so you don't have to think too hard about what arguments to make, responses to arguments that we think you'll get back, social media guidelines for students and parents, and a bunch of other things. Mostly it just gives you the words so that you don't have to sit and think so much about all the arguments you want to make. We've tried to zero in on just a few that we think will be effective. Again, if you see anything that's coming up, if you have concerns about the toolkit, please email me. this is going to be living and ongoing, but we hope that this will make sure that we can have student journalism for years in the future, because again, the students have done such incredible work over the last 4 months that it would be a real tragedy to lose any sort of momentum for them now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hillary. Okay, so I wanted to give you a little bit of background about where we stand in Pennsylvania. One thing that's been kind of tricky about this whole process for everybody involved in this New Voices effort has been, it usually starts with a couple people, and then you start to see some movement, and then you try to expand upon that from there. And that was one of the struggles. That was one thing that we asked Hillary about in previous months was, okay, now that we have some movement in Pennsylvania, how do we get more people involved? And that's something that she can probably jump in on too as well. So Hillary, at any point, feel free to jump in. But I wanted to give you a little bit of a timeline about how this all happened, really. So in August of 2018, I met remotely with an advisor from Conestoga High School outside of Philadelphia to begin to contact legislators about New Voices. It was something that we had heard about and felt strongly about, and that's when the process actually began. It wasn't until January, after trying to contact, we both were trying to contact legislators from both parties in the House and in the Senate to try to draft our bill, but Conestoga staff were able to secure the support of Senator Andy Dinniman, who sponsored the bill in the Pennsylvania Senate in January of 2019. And then from January to March, they continued to meet with his staff to work out the bill's language. And so I still remember the day clearly, because in March 2019, the exact date was it was the date of the PSPA state finals at Penn State University, where the Conestoga folks brought the bill in hand and showed it to us for the first time. But they had the first draft of the Senate bill in March of 2019. And then in April, we started to meet with PSPA board members, including Kate Plows and Stacy Hetrick, and SPLC got involved, and we wanted to revise that bill before we resubmitted it to Dinniman's staff, because it was pretty close to what we wanted to be, what we felt like it needed to be, but it didn't quite have some of the language that we were pushing for. Then there was a little bit of a gap there, but in July we found out that the draft bill became Senate Bill 806, and it was already at that point co-sponsored by Senators Brewster, Brown, and Muth. And I just saw recently that it's since been co-sponsored by Senator Hughes as well. So we saw the bill, and we continued our discussions, and then in August that bill was referred to the Senate Education Committee. From there, we still felt like we needed to make some revisions. We were in touch with that same group of folks, and we had asked the SPLC to send a memo to Dinniman's office and the Senate Education Committee staff to outline those concerns, in hopes that the bill could still be revised in committee before it got an extra discussion or a vote. And at that point, that's kind of where we left off with the Senate bill. And then in October, the SPLC hosted a workshop in Potomac, Maryland, and a couple of my students and I met with Sagertown team Hetrick to develop a strategic plan for Pennsylvania, along with other New Voices advocates from across the country in the SPLC group. And from there, we continued to contact folks for endorsements and other potential sponsors in the House, because we needed to have bills in both the House and Senate before we could move forward. And in January, Representative Melissa Schusterman drafted the House Bill 2302 after meeting with the Conestoga group. And then we got a little bit of a scare in February when Senator Dinniman announced his retirement. So his term will end at the end of the year. And as the primary sponsor of the bill, we're hoping that there's still a chance that one of the co-sponsors will pick this up and things can move forward. And then and at the end of the month, end of February, the House Bill 2302 was sponsored by a dozen other representatives and was referred to the House Education Committee. So as it stands, we have bills in the House and the Senate, and they're both in those houses of Congress education committees. Hillary, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe our legislative session is a 2-year cycle. And so with Dinniman's retirement, as long as, if he's still interested, we should still be able to work with them in hopes that we can kind of make something happen by year's end. And then at that point, I'm not exactly sure what happens to the legislative cycle.
Yeah, you still have well into December before we need to worry about things, and this kind of momentum is really great. I'm so thrilled to see that many co-sponsors on a bill. I think after December, if the bill isn't in, then it'll just have to get reintroduced next year. But because you have a House sponsor this year, I'm super not concerned about the Senate. It's all good as far as I'm concerned.
Excellent. So this is probably the perfect time for you and your student staff to get involved with us. And on a side note too, it's more than just legislation. The more endorsements we can get behind this thing, the more oxygen we can give it, the better chance we have at convincing other legislators to get on board. So obviously the SPLC and PSPA are on board with our New Voices effort, as well as the Press Club of Western Pennsylvania. Thank you to Helen for facilitating that. Point Park University, and the SPJ Pittsburgh chapter so far. And I know we have lots of other ones in the works, and I'm sure I've missed some. But like I said, the more supportive organizations that we have, the more likely, and the more column inches we give this movement, the more likely that people are to pay attention to it. And if people are paying attention to it, and legislators know that this is something that we care about and it matters to people, that it's a little bit more likely that things keep moving in Congress. Okay, so how to get involved. I kind of focused mostly on the Pennsylvania New Voices effort, but Hillary, you can chime in too as well on the larger scale. But we are at newvoicespa.com. And some things you can do to contribute to the website. Again, like I said, giving this movement oxygen is super important. So you could write a blog post. You could share a story that you worth protecting. Like we had a student journalist contact us several months ago that they had a story that was that they felt was being censored for no apparent reason, and after review we felt like, hey, this is a really strong story. It's a really important one, and so it was published right on our website. So it's important to show people why, like the kind of quality that we know our students can produce, and the stories that we know that they take seriously, because it's sadly something that I think many of us have probably dealt with, where we speak to another adult professional at any level, and they make certain comments like, it's like just kids. It's just kids. Like these kids, and I'm using that term very loosely, take this stuff very seriously, and their stories deserve to be told, and like I said, we know what they're capable of, but we'll never truly know what they're capable of unless we can give them a platform to produce it. So that's something that can happen right on our website there as well. Your students can provide a testimonial, like why this matters to you, why it specifically matters to you and your school and your community. Around the institute that we went to in Potomac in October, we started a Slack workspace for the New Voices movement through SPLC. So if you email us at panewvoices@gmail.com, or you email Hillary, we can get you on board with especially if you're not from Pennsylvania or whatever. We can get you on board with our Slack workspace. It's basically, if you're not familiar, it's just a messaging system that allows us to quickly and easily communicate with the other stakeholders, and kind of organize that way. It's a little quicker and more seamless than long email threads. We can talk to you about contacting your elected officials and supportive organizations, because it's got to be bigger than just the few folks that kind of began the effort. You might have a connection with an elected official in your area. The more folks that jump on board and sponsor these bills, the more likely they are to get out of committee and make it to the floor for a vote. And even organizations, like I said, we've had some endorsements so far, and that's great. But perhaps you know somebody or an organization that's willing to put their weight behind this bill. The bills, both, speaking of, you can find those online. Like I said, House Bill 2302. Again, primary sponsor Melissa Schusterman, and Senate Bill 806 with primary sponsor Andy Dinniman. If you look those up, you are able to read the bills in their entirety, and you'll see that there's some difference there. So the way the process basically works is if both bills were to make it out of committee, pass the committees that they're the education committees that they're in, and make it to the floors for a vote, then there would have to be some sort of reconciliation process to make them match before they could be sent to the governor's desk to become or to be signed into law. So as it stands, I don't want to maybe speak out of turn, I guess, but I do believe our House bill is a little bit stronger based on the language that it currently contains than the Senate bill. But we're going to continue to try to work with the Senate's Education Committee staff and Senator Dinniman's staff to try to make sure that the language kind of reflects what we value most. You can sign up for the New Voices newsletter. Go to splc.org and you can sign up for that. You'll be in touch with the SPLC with all New Voices related matters. And then we have social media accounts on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. The handles are right there. Hillary, do you want to talk about the work you're doing with the New Voices Summer Institute?
Yeah, we're very excited about the New Voices Summer Institute. So based off of the success that we had last October, bringing everybody together and letting them talk about all their what's common in every state, this summer, actually in 2 weeks, we are hosting a New Voices Student Leaders Institute. We are bringing together something like, I think it's 22 students from 9 states at this point, including 2 of Aaron's students, who are committed to serve as student leaders for the school year, to really elevate the students in this student-driven movement. They will be working this summer specifically on leadership skills, communication skills, coalition building, and coming up with plans that they think that each state should be doing to broaden out the scope of your coalition. So no longer just a couple of schools, but reaching out to other schools who haven't been participating quite yet. And also come up with some new and innovative things for every state to be doing throughout the year. We're really excited about it. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for students. It's certainly a great opportunity for us. Students very often have new and innovative ideas and ways to kind of crack through some of the barriers that we've got. And so I'm very excited to see what they do with it. So I'm sure you'll be hearing from them because they're all very motivated.
Excellent. Well, with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and open this up to questions. If you have any questions for me or questions for Hillary about anything that we discussed today, I'd be happy to take those. One thing that you could do, if now that I can kind of see what we're doing, one thing that you could do, if you haven't already, is join the Pennsylvania School Press Association. I would be remiss not to put in the plug for that. paschoolpress.org, learn how to become a member. We, like the SPLC, although where we lack in law expertise, we make up for in advocacy, and we're happy to support you and your organization, your students, and our entire mission is centered around promoting student media, student journalism in Pennsylvania. So, any questions from anybody? Okay. If you do have any questions that you think of after the presentation and like to get a hold of us, please do so. But please feel free to do so. I do believe that we are able to provide that to all the attendees, correct? Like their like contact information and yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. And we can even link the bills and,
Mhm.
and the helpful things that we talked about today.
That would
So
actually be awesome.
sure. All right. Thank you all for joining, and Hillary, thank you for for jumping on and helping me out there. I hope I know taking the time, especially after a long period of time there where everyone is burnt out on screen time and having to stare at a Zoom call or a Google Meet for so many days, that maybe this might have been one of the last things you wanted to do with the free time you had in your summer. But I think it's a testament to you and how important this stuff is. So thank you for joining us. Heidi, Helen, thank you. And hope to hear from all of you soon.
Thank you so much. This was so informative. Thank you, Hillary, also. And it was really awesome that you guys were willing to do this. The same way that we're all, video called out, you guys took time out of your day for this, and we're just really thankful.
Absolutely.